What's up, YouTube? This is Fossil Fool coming at you from my lab here in Oakland, California. I'm excited to make this video because it's rare in my experience that something that I make in carbon fiber actually has a catastrophic failure. Catastrophic failures are really educational because they cannot be accurately predicted on a computer modeling program. You can do the best you can with finite element analysis, but until you actually make something and try it and see if it works or not, you won't know as much. And this is one of the wheels that I thought was going to be, finally good enough, finally strong enough. I had been through a long process with this latest bike sailing build, going from a smaller axle to a larger axle, for example, going from smaller bearings to brass bushings, and then finally to larger bearings, going from a spoked wheel with a relatively light rim to a more of like a wagon wheel approach with larger compression spokes as opposed to tension spokes. I thought that I had really nailed it, and then I just learned about a week ago or two that I hadn't. I was on my way to the water, and I was riding with this As I was riding at first, it just started wobbling a lot because this area in here was beginning to fail. And I thought, well, it's not falling apart completely. I'll probably be able to make it to the water. And I was excited to test out actually an outboard that I've been working on. I had a choice of whether to turn around and get back to safety or whether to continue to the water. I made the wrong choice and decided to continue to the water. The outness continued, and then at one point it sort of settled and it wasn't out, and I was like, cool, I found, there's a spot where it's going to hold. And then the next thing I knew, in the middle of an intersection, my my axle was still in the boat and the wheel was rolling away. It just fell off, and the wheel literally rolled down the street and hit a curb and bounced into some grass. The entire boat came to a grinding halt in the middle of an intersection. A guy jumped out of his car to try to help me, but it was really difficult. And then I was stuck by the side of the road with no way to get home. And a couple of guys were walking their dog, and I asked them for a big favor, which was to stay with my boat so that I could bike home, get a spare wheel, and then I would be able to get home, which they did. And fortunately, I knew where my spare wheel was, and they only had to wait about 12 minutes. It's rare that something fails in a spectacular fashion, and you can learn a lot when something does fail. Just for an example, see the spacer? See how there's some parts that are dull and some parts are shiny? So my understanding is that the dull parts are where the epoxy was working and actually ripped from too much force, and the shiny parts are where the epoxy never really bonded to what it was being stuck to. So that's kind of educational, because it looks like something that I thought was a good bond was only about 50% bonded. The spacer's job was to be glued up in there so that forces side to side would not cause the wheel to come off. See how the spacer has so much extra space now? I think that happened during the last mile or two from just rubbing, and then finally it popped. See how there's like a jagged thing right here on the spacer? And that basically indicates that it was rolling like this and getting worn down. Right there, there's like a high and a low spot. So that wouldn't be there if it hadn't been getting worn away over the last maybe mile or 3 or 10. So the rest of the video is now going to be about how I made these wheels. The one that failed is wheel number 1 with the purple stuff on it. You know, more of like me just improvising how to make something. Wheel number 2 did not fail, has not failed yet. I actually don't think this one is going to fail. It might fail. The reason why I don't think it's going to fail is that this one, I came up with a method of really centering the hub within the wheel, and it spins really nice. And it doesn't have any wobble, and what that means is that every rotation, the forces are evenly distributed as it rolls. But unfortunately, this one, being my first one, did end up with a slight wobble in it when I was on my way to the water. And I decided not to try to fix it. And then over time, what was happening is that every time it wobbled, there was extra stress on one place where the axle was pushing through the bearing, you know, pushing a little bit more on one spot than everywhere else. And that means that that spot just started to crumble. And like you can even see like there's going to be like dust that comes, you know. See that? All those broken fibers. That used to be properly wetted out resin, and it's now broken. The transition from the hub body to the spokes in my design failed. And you can see how weak it's gotten because over time all of the epoxy just became powder. So now let's take a look at how this wheel was made. You're going to be seeing footage of wheel number 2, which was made slightly better than wheel number 1, but essentially the same. Just a little bit better of a process, especially regarding the alignment of the hub, the centering of the hub. I paid more attention to that in wheel number 2 than wheel number 1, and the result was better, which is probably why wheel number 2 hasn't failed yet. As for what I'm going to do next to get back rolling, right now I'm using my spare wheel, which was one of these, essentially one of these spoked wheels. The reason why I decided to move on from those was because they're too light. The rim and the spokes were not able to hold tension. So every ride I was tightening the spokes, and then after 1 or 2 rides, maybe not every ride, but after 2 or 3 rides I would need to tighten up the spokes again because the rim and the spokes in combination were not strong enough to actually resist the force of the boat. And that would result in moments where there was no tension on the spokes. And when there's no tension on the spokes, the nipples can untwist. And so that kept happening continuously, which is why I decided to make these 2. There you have it in a nutshell. And now let's take a look at how this wheel was made, and we'll get some more insights into the spectacular failure of this carbon fiber mag wheel. Hope you find this stuff interesting, and let me know if you do. Thanks a lot.
Look at those carbon fiber rims spinning. Straight spinning. Could jump the first mile right now, I wouldn't even know it. It looks clean. It looks good. Looks real good.
You can see the smallest of wobble on the right-hand side wheel right about here. Just a little bit when the camera was behind the wheel. And take another look right here. when the camera goes behind after this dip, you can just see on the right-hand wheel just the smallest amount of wobble right about there. The left wheel is pretty perfect.
Souped up. We're locked and loaded, ready for a sail.
You can see the smallest amount of wobble, but it's really subtle. The wheels are designed to be inside the boat so that the widest thing that I have to be aware of is the deck, and that has been helpful for tight squeezes like this pedestrian bridge.
That sounds like fast.
You're looking at sailing footage from San Francisco Bay with 3 friends and I going out in the first mod on a winter afternoon. We're all dressed with full rain suits and we're all ready for a good time. We got snacks on board, beers on board, and we're all comfortable. The boat's performing amazing. The wind, at least at the beginning of this outing, was perfect, not scary and not boring, kind of right in the middle, allowing us to have conversation, allowing us to, sit down without needing to do too much active balancing of the boat. Really, this is the moment for which I created this boat. I wanted to be able to access nature. I wanted to be able to have experiences of adventure and friendship without requiring cars and trucks, without feeling that icky feeling of polluting the earth in my free time. And because I knew that I wanted these experiences to feel safe, and I knew what it felt like from previous boats to be undersized out in the chop, I went with a larger craft. I started with the plans for the Ross Lillystone First Mate, scaled it up 12%, substituted that beautiful translucent G10 for plywood, and made my bicycle-specific mods. And the additional weight of the scaled up craft is the reason why the wheels that I had previously used were inadequate. They were loosening on the way to the water, and that's why I felt the need to come up with something that was just next level strength wise. We've already seen that the thing that I came up with wasn't built to stand the test of time, at least wheel number 1, but now you know the motivation. The motivation is to get out into nature, to experience friendship, togetherness, adventure. So it's not just that I love making things from carbon, it's that I'm trying to accomplish specific goals. And with that, let's get into the making. Like almost everything else I make, I start with pink foam because it's cheap and I can go get more of it at the Home Depot when I need to. I am squeezing the stack of these shapes because I want to make them identical. I have this hunch that if I make them identical, then once I put this whole thing together, the hub is going to be in the exact center of the wheel, which is my goal. So you can see me working on the new foam on top of the first wheel. The first wheel is sitting on the table. It's ended up being heavier than the second one because the second one, I had more practice. I knew exactly how to make it lighter without sacrificing strength, which is the name of the game with carbon fiber. It's to cut out all the stuff you don't need, keep the stuff that you do need, and that's when you get your lightweight results. So there's a nice little technique there using a pivot point to get a better curve. Shaping these foam pie slices, pizza slices, we're shaping them and trying to make them identical, giving them rounded corners. so that the end product turns out nicely too. You can see the rounded corners that I did on the first wheel, how they make the mag spokes, you know, a little bit less blocky. Rounded corners also increase the strength of anything you make because carbon doesn't work well around a right angle. It's a tensile strength material, so it needs rounded corners. With all the environmental impact of buying the carbon and everything, I might as well share my techniques so that if you want to make stuff out of carbon, you'll have a shorter learning curve and you'll have, good results sooner. So these days, the form of carbon that I am excited about the most is sleeving, because sleeving allows you to make structural tubes with no frayed edges. A lot less sanding, stronger forms, easy to handle. So I'm aiming for 3 layers per spoke. Let's try it again. Starting to work. Nice little star pattern in the middle, and let's check it out with the tube. Starting to work, but a little bit too tight. And the nice thing about using an existing rim was that the detail of how it clinches the tire was done for me. That's one of the harder details of how to make a wheel is the interface between the wheel and the tire. So maybe just the act of, hopefully just the act of filing it off. Taking my tube and making sure that it's square to the table, because you only get one chance at that. Pretty good. All right, now weighing all the carbon is a good way to know how much resin to mix. In this case, it was so much carbon that I decided to just make smaller batches so that the epoxy wouldn't cook while we were working. So I'm using these smaller chunks of sleeving. The shorter the sleeving, the harder it is in some ways, because it's greater chance of the ends fraying. This is going to be the hub body. When you cut them real short, then you do have ends that fray. Basically, I'm building up multiple layers on the table rather than on my form, which is that tube, because the form is covered with mold release. And if I were to try to use the form, then I feel like I would be smearing the mold release around. So I wanted to be more careful. In fact, you can see me using the brush to lightly touch the entire form with resin. I'm trying to use a very wet brush because I don't want the mold release to contaminate this epoxy. And now looking at this with hindsight, I'm thinking, why did I use mold release at all? Why don't I just glue a steel tube into this design so that the bearings push on something legit? I'm overhanging the edge of the tube on purpose. That's the part that's going to fold open. Remember how it folds open? By leaving it long and having that extra length, I will be able to spread it out on the table, and that'll create a ring. From above or from below? Let's go from below. That will weld the spokes to the hub. So it'll be like a nice flange. Now I'm going to squeeze this over the very end of the tube. Yeah, now this short section, I'm just putting it to build up the wall thickness where the bearings are going to be later. So I've got some long lengths, some short lengths to thicken the hub, and then a couple more longer ones to finish it out. Brush it heavily. transfer some more resin into this one, please? I like to use my eye and my hands to know if there's enough resin. I figured doing it on the table is ultra secure. You know that it got the right amount. So now I'm basically moving it apart so that the diameter will constrict. So now we've got these longer sleeves, like 8 inches long, but that's for the hub, and that's because the top and the bottom are going to open up like a flower. Now look how it's becoming a nice uniform. Yeah. So now I'm trying to work out all the layers so that they sit up against each other and there's no air bubbles. See how wide it gets? It's such an amazing material. You can make it narrow enough to constrict around the tube, but then when you open it up, you can create that nice flange. The inside corner, so that later on, it doesn't have any air pockets when it cures. See what's happening there? All that's going to cure solid. Boom, there it is. Boom. We did it. And it's okay to touch the epoxy at this point. That's right. We're on our way. Okay, great. So now we're going to do the process on each spoke. And you can grab a spoke and you can start liberally wetting it out. I'm glad that I was able to work with my apprentice, Sonny, on this because 3 layers, 5 spokes, that's 15 separate wet outs. And that would take a while by myself. So many hands make light work. And when you have a good design, you can set it up so that there's like a build day where, you know, things go right quite quickly because you kind of prepared for it, and then you need a lot of hands. Nice. Once again, the amount of carbon that's kind of hanging over the end is deliberate, and you'll see why. But there's the extra is part of the design. Just building up the wall thickness. Each one of the spokes is going to get 3 layers of this medium weight carbon fiber sleeving from Solar Composites in New Hampshire. Mention this channel, mention the Fossil Fuel channel, and you will most likely get free shipping. Here I am. I'm going to make these postage stamp connector pieces. And take a look at the fibers that are hanging off those postage stamps. Those are the fibers that don't happen with the sleeving. And go to the outdoor table and sand the last area opposite these on each alignment critical. So go ahead and place it over. I think I'm just going to start doing it. So here's the fun part. We are using the pizza slices that are already covered with carbons. These are the mag spokes, and you can see that one end there's the pink foam visible, and the other end it's got that long overhang. Getting it backwards there. There we go. Nice going. Yeah. And so the inner end, I didn't want a lot of extra fibers getting in the way, so I set the end of the tubes right up against the pink foam. But the outer end, the end that matches the rim, I wanted the extra to hang over the rim to, you know, really grab the rim. Since this is not going to be a braking surface, it's only a structural wheel, doesn't have any brakes. So cool. This is a self-centering system. Big moment. Ooh, and it's a good fit. I can feel it. It's working. Nice. Okay. Now, finally, you can see that flower flange that's sort of glued to the table, the outer, that circle. Some of those pieces are going to get cut off, but there's a nice weld area there. That's good. And now I'm using the ruler to make sure that the angle is consistent. You can do this with the angle finder as well, but I'm using a ruler, just measuring center to center on the spokes, making slight adjustments so that my eye gets corrected. Setting us up for it. And this is the reason why we left that long, because we're going to fold it down over the spokes, getting more weld area. Look at that. Look at how much carbon is going to touch carbon. It opens up like a flower. Oh yeah. That is a nice strong form because the hub body is getting, we're going to wet it out, joined. And the wetting out process also just pushes it down. That's the key with carbon. You want to join things with a lot of surface area. Look at that starfish kind of shape going on. That is so cool. And look how little time it took us to make it. At the very end, you get a surface that you can sand down to flat. Everything's wet right now, but the chemical reaction has already started. And by tomorrow, this thing's going to be rigid. Cool. Now it's time just to weigh things down. Make sure that the carbons are real tight. Awesome. Now, it's a simple matter of weighing it down. Cool. So the next day you can see how the table really helps you because you got that nice flush surface. The thickened epoxy is cured. And everything's nice and flat, everything's nice and aligned. Compare that to the first wheel where I didn't have my act together quite yet. So this should be simply a matter of breaking the weak bond between the epoxy and the mold released steel. Now looking at this in retrospect, I can see why leaving steel in the hub might have made it a better wheel, because the steel has that point strength that carbon doesn't. Giving it a weigh down. So wheel number 1 coming in at 2.64 pounds. And the wheel number 1 was sort of like winging it, making up the steps as I went along with sort of a hunch of how things went together. Wheel number 2, 2.42 pounds. Wheel number 2 is the same concept as wheel number 1, but it's a simpler, more elegant, cleaner implementation, saving 3 ounces. The wheel's looking all dusty because I asked Sonny to, sand down some of the sharp bits, but now we're making it really look beautiful again. Sand it down, build it up. So this section, basically I wanted to create a system for sanding it flat, and I didn't want to wing it and make it round. I wanted to make it square to the rim. That way when we press the bearings in, we're pressing it into a square shape. Why don't you do some of this, Sonny? Okay, now we got our act together. We've got the wheel clamped nicely to the surface. We got the spacing correct on the sanding system, so I basically asked my intern to go to town. Okay, so now that we've got those surfaces nicely prepped and flat and square, I'm roughing them up, and I've come up with a plan for inserting a spacer essentially in the middle of the hub. The point of the spacer is to provide a stop for the bearings. So when I push in the bearings, they're going to sit up against the spacer. Now the goal at this point is to use this spacer and have it end up right in the middle of the hub body. Nice and gluey. So I'm gonna make that happen right now. Yep. Everything's gonna get gluey. And I wanna use enough that it works, and not so much that handling the bearings is a big disaster. Okay. Yeah, pushing the spacer down into the hub and using the bearing to position it right in the middle. And this is the part that had that shiny area afterwards. You can see how tight the fit is. There's no slop there. That's really kind of surprising that ended up having such a weak bond. I think if I had to do this again, and I'm probably going to because I would want to keep sailing, getting there by bike, I would probably use a metal insert, like a large machined aluminum insert that actually handles the bearing forces and does the spacer job. That's what I got for the documentation of the carbon fiber mag wheels used to transport this 17-foot, 350-pound sailing rowing dinghy, the first mod, from the streets of Oakland to San Francisco Bay, and doing it all by folding bike. Folding bike then fits in the bow of the boat behind my friend Caleb. Thanks for checking it all out with me and being part of my journey as an inventor. Check out this little moment where the sheet tangles with the tiller extension. My friends never noticed, but it's stressful. I actually recently fixed that one. But anyway, you gotta end these things somewhere. So till next time, I will keep at it and following my passions out here, trying to blaze the trail for low carbon fun. And I hope you take part in that journey with me.